Hey guys, hey, let's take a quick tour of my storage area. It's pretty full. It's my garage, so it's pretty full. But I just gonna show you what is kind of the way I store stuff. I know a lot of people, are kind of new to following me or what have you, and kind of give you an idea how much stuff I got, which is a lot. Over here, I've got a bunch of bent tubs and stuff, and I kind of need to get me a tub rack, to where I could stack it, and it's easier to pull in and out rather than having to lift and open it and move, and every time I do that, because some of these things are heavy. That's where I keep my pots and pans, my unbreakables, my wood stuff, plastic stuff, maybe new in box type stuff, that's not going to get damaged, and that's where I keep it. And then over here, I started out, originally when we first started, we started out with one shelf. Now we've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 shelves, but you can kind of see we've got all kinds of stuff there. I mean, and each shelf is numbered, and we've got, like visionware, plates, all my breakable stuff. All my fragile bowls, cups, just all kinds of stuff, and I would say one shelf looks just like the other, but there's always something cool on each one. They got all these glasses, margarita glasses, and, just all kinds of stuff. Cookie jars, champagne flutes, you name it. I mean, we've got a lot of stuff. Corral, just all kinds of stuff. And there's probably some unbreakable stuff that we've got mixed up in there that probably, we could put somewhere else. But, as you can see, we're pretty stacked out. So that's kind of my shelves, and I've got, that was 4 of them, and here's another one. There's number 5. That's shelf number 5. Just mixer parts, blender parts, crock pot parts, because people do buy parts. Things break, and you can't call the manufacturer and get a new part because they don't make them. So why not you go out there and thrift them and sell them? Somebody needs them. Then I've got a whole dresser full of cups. I mean, I've got cups. I would say, I've got all these. I just use an old dresser that we had and, put cups in them. And it works out good. The height is about right. They're not going to get broke. So that's good. And we got some more tubs. Over here, we get like, I don't know, it's more places for cups. And, we've got stuffies and, and stuff like that. We've got all them. And it's a good place for, these are good height for like low ball glasses, because we sell a lot of low ball glasses too. If it's glassware, we'll sell it, and, we even got our culls, this stuff is either going to Goodwill or yard sale or something like that, because, that stuff we had listed for a long time. And, when we first started out reselling, we just like any new person, we excited and see something cool, you buy it. And then after 3 years, you still have it on your shelf. And as a reseller, you don't want that. You'd rather have stuff that'll move a little quicker. And we haven't unlisted a lot of stuff because if they've got watchers and if they've got several watchers and and I still check sales through rates. Sometimes I just priced it a little too high, and I've got to go through and adjust the price a little bit. And I run sales, to try to get move some of that old inventory, But But anyway, that's kind of how I've got all my product stored. You know, that's about 1,500 items, you know. And it's taken us 3 years because, you know, you don't think about it, but, you know, we can go out thrifting, you know, on a weekend or something and pick up 30 items. But if you sell 25, you've only grown your store 5. And, you know, I'm trying to grow this thing, and you know, it's just you don't think about it, but when you're buying stuff that sells, it's harder to grow. You know, if you're working full time like I am, because I'm working 50 hours a week, you know, on a regular job. You know, my wife's working too. So you think about that, that makes it kind of tough, you know, 50 hours a week and then come home and try to list 8-10 items a day, usually pack, you know, 8 to 10 items a day, you know, and then you try to get on, you know, different, you know, platforms and try to create a little bit of content, maybe to encourage people that's struggling or just starting out or whatever, or just comparing, you know, I'm a part-time reseller. I'm not full-time. You know, you know, sometimes it's nice to, if you're struggling, it's kind of nice to find somebody that's struggling with the same stuff you are. You know, it is. But anyway, I just thought I'd kind of show you what 1,500 items look like in a garage. You know, this is a garage and a half or what have you, or a car and a half. You know, they say 2 cars, but maybe if there was, they'd both have to be Focuses or something like that. It wouldn't be no 2 full size. But anyway, appreciate you watching. Y'all have a good one.